Welcome. You're listening to Latin Waves with your hosts, Sylvia and Stuart Richardson. Latin Waves is more than just hot rhythms. This is a show about community, about creating a culture that is inclusive and based on fairness. Because everyone deserves dignity, respect, and has something to contribute. A new world is possible, and it all starts with us. I'm delighted this evening to be joined by Dr. Maria Victor Paez. She's a sociologist, and we are delighted to have her on our program. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Sylvia, for inviting me on your program.
Now, for many people, Venezuela is a country in crisis. What people have perhaps forgotten or don't even know is that Venezuela has also been a country that has inspired many countries, and particularly under the leadership of his former president, Hugo Chavez. Venezuela became a landmark on the map. Can you talk a little bit about the legacy that was left by President Hugo Chavez, being that today is his anniversary of his death?
Venezuela was a country that was really a colony of the United States. Its job was to produce petroleum and nothing more, and of course to sell all this petroleum to the United States. The big U.S. companies that were producing oil in Venezuela paid a real minimum of taxes to the country. Under contracts that were signed, 60 years before, they paid 1% of their profit to the country. Now, contrast this with this very same companies that were working in Canada, and in Canada, they paid the government of Canada 12%. So you can imagine that 1% was absolutely nothing. Now, what happened to all this money? This money was basically thrown away. The elites that governed the country for 40 years in this tandem, two parties that took turns governing, left a country that was almost 80% of its people were poor because the money was never used for the welfare of the people, just nominally. Most of it went through to this elite. It's estimated that it was an amount equivalent to 15 Marshall Plans that disappeared. The Marshall Plan was the plan that redid Europe after the Second World War. So this was an enormous. So along came President Chavez. He won these elections because nobody in Venezuela believed in democracy anymore. The governments had such a corruption that along came President Chavez, Hugo Chavez, on a shoestring campaign, and he promised to rid the country of this terrible corruption, and he won. And as he promised, the first thing that happened was that he wanted a new constitution. So it wasn't that he wanted, but he didn't write it. There was elections for the representatives. People voted. They voted in these people to take part in redoing the Constitution. And for the first time, it wasn't an elite writing it. There were groups representing women, representing indigenous people, representing youth. And so they wrote this Constitution, which totally changed the country and got rid of all the loopholes that the elite had. And the most important thing was that it declared the petroleum and all the riches of the country belonged to the people, not to an elite. So the government since then, the Bolivarian government of Chavez and now Maduro, the monies that come from selling the petroleum went into public schools, public hospitals, public housing, infrastructure, pensions. In Venezuela, there were no pensions for I mean, not no pensions, but it was something like less than 100,000 people had pensions. And today, everybody over the age of I don't know, I think it's 65 or 70 has a pension. Even during these terrible times, they have been building about 8 million housing, public housing, with the help of Cuba. There is a Barrio Dentro, a small clinic in almost every neighborhood and village of the city. So all of these things is how the governments of Chavez and then Maduro have plowed back into the country to satisfy the needs of the people. Now, all of this brought about the intense animosity and I would say enmity of the United States. The companies were told, yes, you can try to get petroleum in Venezuela to produce it, but it has to be 40-60. That means 60% of the profits are for the country and 40% for you. Some companies accepted this, but for example, ExxonMobil refused this and left the country, and many of the American companies did that. They didn't want that. They thought this was highway robbery, even though this is how it was when they worked with other countries. When Chavez died, they thought, thought the United States, this is the chance. Maduro will be a weak person. He won't be able to carry on like Chavez did, and so they intensified the terrible things they've been doing to try to overthrow the government. So there was, since Maduro became president, we've had invasions, paramilitary from Colombia. We've had assassinations and attempted assassinations. We've had a terrible cyber attack that left the country 5 days without electricity. Just think of it. Sometimes we have a blackout, that lasts a couple of hours here because it's raining or something. Well, imagine 5 days of that. All of this is a hybrid war that the United States has unleashed against Venezuela. And part of it was the most important part, or the most lethal part of it, has been these illegal, coercive measures, which are called sanctions. They really aren't sanctions because they're illegal. The only sanctions that are legal are those that are carried out by the UN. These are unilateral, illegal sanctions of the United States that go against international law.
I just wanted to point out that if Hugo Chavez's legacy was to raise the country, on the map as a country that erased their, foreign debt, a country that nationalized industry and raised the profile of workers as the essential part of their economy,
Yes.
and also raised not only the living standard of people in his country, and it became a model for Latin America. I would also say that tied to his legacy has been the legacy of Nicolas Maduro, who has withstand attacks, in multiple forms of invasions. So can we talk a little bit about the significance of this? Because most people think, well, it's sanctions, it's better than bombing, but is it?
Oh, no, this is what people who think they're being very progressive. Well, it's better than invasion. It has killed. The latest count is about 100,000 people in just 1 year. From 17 to 18 to 2018, it killed 40,000 people. Now, up to now, it's been 100,000. Why? Because the sanctions forbid Venezuela from selling its own oil. Venezuela got about 90% of its government revenue from oil. So Venezuela has been unable to sell oil, and it's unable to buy in the international market. Now, this is really important because it meant that we cannot buy the food that we need. It cannot buy, especially the medicine that we need. Especially now, imagine in a pandemic, you can't just invent insulin, or you can't invent the cancer medicines. I mean, these are all patented by big pharma. Well, Venezuela has been unable to buy these. People who needed dialysis, people who had AIDS, people who had, who needed insulin, all of these things that the government couldn't buy in the international market. Well, people died. There were these children who had been sent to Italy because they were going to have bone marrow transfer. Well, the country can't just whip out of the air the wherewithal to do bone marrow transfer. They had to send it to another country. Well, some of these children actually died because Venezuela was not allowed to use the international banks. There has been, I would call it a piñata, because these international banks where Venezuela had its monies have stolen $6 billion worth of Venezuelan assets. And these are countries in Europe, 17 countries actually, in Portugal, England. England has $2 billion worth of Venezuela's gold. And these countries have just simply been pirates. They took over, they have taken over, they have stolen this money. Now there has been three. Now this is the third UN human rapporteur who has gone to Venezuela and has denounced this and said Venezuela is in crisis, but it's because the United States, Canada, and Europe have imposed these dreadful conditions, these sanctions, these illegal sanctions going against I don't know how many of the international laws that have impoverished the country. They did a war against the currency. The Venezuelan currency collapsed. So Venezuela is using cryptocurrency in order to survive. And this is a crime against humanity, what they've done to Venezuela. The only other country who has suffered similar fate, apart from, a military war, is Cuba. So only with Venezuela, it's sort of larger than what happened with Cuba, because Venezuela is a larger country, so more people have been affected. So the United States and Canada and Europe are going against the Charter of the UN, against the Charter of the OAS, against the Geneva Convention, against the International Criminal Court, and they don't care, They don't care, no matter how many times the UN has said this is illegal, this shouldn't be. They continued, and Biden continues. Obama started it with a decree declaring that Venezuela was an unusual threat to the security of the United States. This was hilarious. Everyone's thinking, what are they, crazy? Venezuela, tiny Venezuela compared to the United States, is a threat to their security. But it wasn't funny. It was done so that he could throw everything he could to the United States without going through the Congress. And Biden has done the same thing just a week or so ago. Biden did again a decree. And the United Nations has denounced the United States because this is their, how can I say, their Machiavellian piece. They say, this country is a threat to our security, so therefore we don't have to follow, the rules. We don't have to go and ask Congress any oversight. We don't have to go follow the international law because we are defending ourselves. Well, of course, the thought of the United States defending itself against Venezuela is ridiculous. There it is, a nuclear power with the largest military budget in the world, saying that Venezuela threatens them. See?
Now, most Latin Americans understand that this is invasion. We understand imperialism has many faces, and we've seen it
Yes,
activated in Argentina when they collapsed their complete economy. We've seen it activated in Chile with
yes,
Pinochet. We've seen it activated throughout Latin America, Central America with the dirty wars and the death squads. We've seen it activated in the coup in Honduras. So we see the face of imperialism has many faces. I like to talk a little bit about the significance, though, that Venezuela has for the world, because wherever you go in the world, I was in South Africa and people were like so inspired by Venezuela. You know, there were people talking about Venezuela being like this, guiding light, out of poverty, and they were really excited. If you go to Europe, there's people there organizing and thinking about creating an economy for the people, by the people. And there's economists in the US like Dr. Robin Hanel, who wrote a book inspired by the Venezuelan revolution, this beautiful revolution. So clearly, the threat is not Venezuela is a threat to the states, but Venezuela is a threat to the idea that capitalism is the only way to create an economy. So, can we
yes.
talk a little bit about the charges of populism that tend to not only diminish uh, the fervor with which the Venezuelan people have defended their right to be autonomous, to declare who their president is, and how this is being undermined by the media and by the juridical systems that keep you know looking the other way when they see literally violations against human rights committed against the Venezuelan people.
Look, Venezuela is a threat to capitalism. That is for sure. There are two things that are the reasons why they go after Venezuela. First of all, because it is immensely rich. It has an enormous reserve of oil. I don't think it's even second to Saudi Arabia. It has one of the largest deposits of gold in the world. So we're very rich. It isn't, like Cuba, poor Cuba, who only had, sugar when Fidel took over. This is a country with an enormous amount of riches. But it's more than that. It's exactly what you say. It's the example of a country who will say, we don't care what you in Washington or in Ottawa or in Brussels say. We are a sovereign nation. We liberated ourselves from the Spanish Empire, and we are not going to be a colony anymore. We reject colonialism and we reject imperialism. And there is an elite that has governed the country for 40 years. That is a white elite that was sort of beholden to the imperial powers, and they have gone against the Bolivarian government, allying themselves to the enemies of the country. They don't care. They only care about their own interest. And you know what? With all this war against Venezuela, Cuba and Venezuela are the two countries who are ahead of every other country in the hemisphere, okay, in the number of cases and the number of deaths. In Venezuela, there are 47 deaths per million inhabitants. This is amazing. The cases are about 140,000 in a population of 28 million, just like Canada. It's a population that's similar to Canada. And there are only 140,000 cases. How has this happened? Because of the discipline, because of the organization of the popular grassroots that are helping the government keep people healthy. And the other thing that keeps people healthy is people who study health know that you aren't healthy just because there's a doctor. It isn't just the medical services, which are, of course, very important, but this thing called the social determinants of health. That means you are healthy because you got food, because you've got a roof over your head, because you've got education and know how to read and know how to carry out, instructions and whatnot, because you have a job. So these are the social determinants of health, and that's what the Bolivarian Revolution has been about since 22 years ago. So contrast this with Colombia, with Peru, with Bolivia, with Brazil. In Venezuela, you don't pay for the medical services. Education is completely free, all the way up to university. There have been 3 million housing built in the last 3-4 years, even during this war. The situation of Venezuelans is privileged. Now, how can I give you an example why? Do you remember when the newspapers, you couldn't open a newspaper without people saying, people are leaving Venezuela, they left by droves, and they would invent that millions and millions left and all of this kind of stuff. Well, many did, it is true, not as many as they thought. Well, all those people who were lured by the Group of Lima countries, that is the right-wing governments in Venezuela, telling people, yes, leave Venezuela, come over here. Well, they arrived to all of these other countries, and of course they found no jobs, and they found tremendous bias against them. And when the pandemic came, these countries didn't want these Venezuelans there. So many Venezuelans suffered tremendously through xenophobia. And so you know what the government of President Maduro did? He said he sent planes. He sent planes to Ecuador, planes to Bolivia, planes to Brazil, planes to Chile, so to bring these people back. And so there have been, I think it's over 1 million now who have come back from Venezuela, and they realized, no, here we have medical care, here we have food, here we have people who will watch over us. And it has been amazing. It was called the Misión Vuelta a la Patria, means returning to the country. Now, you don't hear this in the newspapers. They don't tell you about the millions of people, thousands of people who are returning to Venezuela. They return because there is a government there whose whatever meager money it has, it just uses it for the needs of the people. Of course, Venezuela is a beacon for those who want to change the structure of these countries that supposedly are democracies and in fact are run by elites.
Maybe speak to the workers in North America, the workers around the U.S., the workers around the world who perhaps are waking up to this story, who may have missed the story. And yet, what is, a call to perhaps solidarity, but a call to really recognize our own power, and I wonder if you could just maybe send some inspiring words, because it's really easy to get defeated, to feel flattened. We're in the midst of pandemic. We're in the midst of yet another government in the U.S. that looks a lot like the old one. We invited the Democrats, but they're acting exactly the way the Trump administration was behaving, and worse, they're bombing people now.
Yes. Well, I think in Canada there is a very big message here. Canada has to stop being a colony. I was embarrassed for Canada, the country where I live, the country of my children and grandchildren, when I heard Trudeau say to Biden, we have missed American leadership. This is ridiculous. Canada has to stop being a colony, has to start thinking of itself as a sovereign nation, not as a slavish country that falls at the feet, even in the feet of a gangster like Trump. It fell at his feet, and now the feet of this man Biden, whose hypocrisy is sometimes even worse, because he says I'm a good fellow, and yet look at the things that he does. But the workers in Canada have to have consciousness of the fact that they are the victims of this mentality, this colonial mentality that Canada has. And it's even more pathetic because at the same time that it falls at the feet of the United States, Canada itself acts like a colonial power when it comes to the indigenous peoples. So it is a very weird situation here. This the unions in Canada, fortunately, have a toehold better than their counterparts in the United States. In the United States, they've destroyed the unions left, right, and center. It's ridiculous. This pandemic has exposed the clay feet of so many of our leaders and so many of the systems in which we live. And things shouldn't go back the way they were. We should examine and say, this has to change, because I can assure those who are listening to me, there will be another pandemic. We are destroying nature such a way that these viruses are coming to us because we are destroying the ecosystem where animals live. We have destroyed the places where animals are, and we are destroying the way we are bringing animals up, in farms and in conditions that create viruses. So the next one will come. What will we have learned? What will we have learned from this terrible pandemic? And if the working class doesn't realize that they are at the front, that they have been very much affected, much more than people in nice neighborhoods with white-collar workers work. No. It is the working class of Canada that has suffered the greatest during this pandemic. And unless they take conscience of this and take the reins of their own destiny in their hands and demand that they will no longer be treated this way, then we will not have learned anything from this pandemic. And I hope that we have.
Since the death of President Hugo Chavez on March 5th, 2013, Venezuela has been under attack. And I have to say that although we celebrate Hugo Chavez for his leadership and for becoming a hero for many across the world, it truly is Maduro who will go into the books of history, having withstand so many wars, in multiple fronts as he defends his country. And
he has been so wise. He has really steered the country through the worst war since the War of Independence. This is Nicolás Maduro, and if Chavez were alive right now, he would congratulate himself, because he is the one who asked the people to vote for Nicolás Maduro. He chose Maduro as his successor, and he was right. Maduro was a bus driver and a union leader, and look what the bus driver has done. He has saved his nation. It is a remarkable, as you say, it will be Maduro in the history books too.
Thank you again for being with us, and thank you for giving us a sober reminding of our own power as workers, of the ability to stand up when it matters, to speak up when it matters. And so I want to leave the last words to you, and thank you again for all that you do.
Thank you, Sylvia, and let us hope that we all learn something very important from Venezuela and take the opportunity of this pandemic to change things here in Canada, because things don't have to be the way they are here. Venezuela has proved that. Thank you very much, Sylvia, for having me and for your tremendous and marvelous solidarity.
Thank you. Thank you again. Bye-bye.
We've come to the end of our show, Latin Waves. Latin Waves is an internationally syndicated weekly program made available through campus and community stations and available out to the world at www.latinwavesmedia.com. Visit Latin Waves Media to hear previous shows, to access resources, or support our efforts towards social change via community project engagement.